Cuomh go léir a cóide agus tá fáilte wrote, welcome to be my guest with me, Mary Honan on LíR Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary, Clare's Wish Foundation in Limerick, and Deel Animal Rescue in West Limerick. And my very special guest today is Dr. Cindy O'Connor, who's the director of Athena, the Academy for Mental Health and Wellbeing. Hi, Cindy, how are you?
I'm good, Mary, and delighted to have the opportunity to speak with you.
Gosh, you're a person who is, gosh, you must be so busy now. Especially in this current times, you must see a huge increase in mental health.
Do you know, Mary, we're busy, but not as busy as I would have expected us to be. And I think sometimes people don't know where we are, or maybe don't know enough about us. Because definitely, all of the research is telling us that there's a significant increase in mental health difficulties with people at the moment. And can I just say, Mary, I was delighted when you mentioned was it the animal welfare?
Deel Animal Rescue.
Because I have my dog here with me.
I have two. Both are rescues.
And I'm hoping she's going to be very good and doesn't bark.
She barks. So, some of my guests have actually brought their dogs on with them on screen. Some of my Irish dancing colleagues who are absolute animal crazy have brought their dogs on in the most fabulous outfits.
Oh, lovely. No, we just got her groomed. She doesn't really like to wear clothes, but she's sitting there on the chair. So she's dozing off, so hopefully she'll be okay.
I don't put clothes that much on mine either. Jackets and that now and again, but yeah, they're all there. I had 3, but I lost one there recently. And talking about trauma, it's probably the worst. I probably needed a psychotherapist after it. It was just horrific because I only got 2 days. 2 days, I found out that, and they only let me bring her home for a night just to say goodbye. And putting her to sleep in my arms was the single worst thing I've ever had to do in my life, apart from my parents' death. And I thought, I'm going to lose my mind. Even still, I get these flashbacks of that moment. But I think people are suffering a lot, especially in this in lockdown, and especially now. They're talking about things like no jab, no job. The HSE are trying to bring in that. That plays with people's minds as well, because if you can't have a jab or you're afraid of having a jab, you're discriminated against.
I think there's been a lot of anxiety in general for people. What we've seen are now families been flown together during lockdown. And what I found was really interesting, Mary, that in my clinical work, sometimes people were saying to me, that both partners were out working all day, and now all of a sudden that they're at home. And it was very interesting to see what roles people were slotting into. Where people might say, I'm the main breadwinner, but yet, my partner's work seems to take precedence and I'm expected to maybe look after the children while he's working. So it can bring up a lot of issues maybe that wasn't there before, just trying to navigate, how we can both work, how the responsibilities of the house can be shared. And I think not to forget, for people who have young children, they were really parenting from work, which was very, very difficult.
Yeah.
So I think there's been a lot happening.
And what I was always very conscious of throughout this whole lockdown, which I don't think enough attention was given to, was this phrase, be safe, stay home. What if and when the home was the least safe place you could possibly be? If you were a child who was being abused at home, if you were a husband or a wife who was being abused by your partner, and you're safe, everyone else's idea of the safe place is the least safe place in the world for many people. And were you conscious of that as a psychotherapist?
Oh, absolutely, Mary. And again, we would have seen through reports in the media the increase in domestic violence. And there was no escape for people, and they were completely isolated. People weren't allowed into the home. Even for children where there's, maybe addiction issues in the home, school might be an escape, but none of that was available to people. So I think a lot of people definitely struggled, and maybe didn't have anywhere to go.
No,
So
and
feeling stuck in that, really feeling stuck in that place.
yeah, but as well as that, Cindy, I hope you don't mind me calling you Cindy. I just realised I called you
Not
Cindy.
at all. Not at all.
But I don't use it either. The title, I just like, but very rare occasions. But the thing about it is, I've noticed as well, they talk about, oh, isn't it fantastic? Children, we're introducing computers, and children are at home and they're on their computer and they can zoom in and they can have what if the child doesn't have a computer? What if the child doesn't have a home? If they're living in a bed and breakfast or a hotel because their mother has, or parents have been put out of their home and they're living, and they have to get up every morning at 9, go to school when they were allowed to school, and they're wandering the street then until 9 o'clock at night when they're allowed back into the hotels. What happened during all of that COVID lockdown situation when they had to leave the premises at 9 o'clock in the morning and had no place to go for the whole day with their parents until 9 o'clock at night? The mental state of parents in that situation must have been absolutely horrific.
Oh, I can only imagine, Mary. And I was looking at the news the other night, and I just saw, I worked formerly in Pieta. I worked there as Chief Clinical Officer for 13 years. So I saw a report the other evening where they were saying there was a significant increase in the rates of self-harm and suicidal ideation with the young clients that were coming into the service. And I was thinking, oh my God, like, imagine if you're a parent and you walk into your child's bedroom and you discover that they've been engaging in self-harm, and really terrified and not knowing how to respond or how best to support your child. And one of the things that we decided to do in Athena, it's actually up on my LinkedIn and on my own Facebook page, is we're hosting a 1-hour seminar, like a webinar for parents on the 27th of October. And basically they can just message us, we'll send them the link. And it's just helping them to understand self-harm and also how to respond to it. Because in most scenarios, which I think is a very normal response from parents, they react. And when we react, we're coming from the emotional side of the brain. So then you may end up with not just a child in crisis, but a parent also in crisis. So it's not just for parents, it's for caregivers in general, or anybody who thinks that they're going to have some interaction maybe with somebody who's engaging in self-harm. And we're going to run that free of charge for people, because we just think that there's a lack of information out there. A lack of support sometimes for parents. So myself and 2 of my colleagues, Marguerite Kiley and Nolene Devlin, are going to host that.
But
yeah,
I mean, it's just horrific. I think, and narrow-sighted for people to constantly put up. I've noticed that that's a trigger as well. When you'd see on RTE, be safe, stay home, always up at the top of the corner, and it would always trigger this with me. What about this is just, it's a first world problem, really, when you put a post up like that, be safe, stay home, and you have people wandering the streets from 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night. How are the children supposed to get the study? They have no computers, they have no technology, they haven't got a television they can't zoom in their teachers, they haven't got the space to actually study. And this idea that cherish the children and all children are created equally and should be treated equally under our constitution, I don't think all children are being treated equally at all. And certainly have been throughout COVID.
Yeah. And a roof over our head is a basic human need. It's as essential as food and water.
Absolutely.
So it's very difficult to achieve your dreams, or to move on from that when your basic needs are not met, which is really sad for so many people. And I think when you look at the housing crisis now in Ireland, it's really out of control. There are so many people that are struggling, so many children that are struggling, and it's going to be very, very difficult for them to fulfill their potential.
I interviewed the Mayor of Limerick not last week, and I have a particular bugbear. At one stage, I was thinking of going for the council here in Limerick, but I was finishing my PhD, so that something had to give.
Yeah.
So I just thought I'm just cutting myself very thin now at this stage. So, but one of the things was housing. I'm so incensed when I walk around this city and I see the amount of good quality houses boarded up with, and I just think there's a moral duty on the councils, if they can't renovate those houses, to do what they did in Liverpool some years back, and they did it several times, and that was to offer it to families to have 5 years to do it up to a living standard, to prove it was for a family, to prove it was not for sale, rent or lease. And after that 5 years, they got it for £1. And that was what all they had to pass. And that the deeds of the house were theirs. The pressure was taken off councils to renovate them. And families had something a roof over their head and something to aim at and do up. Many people had a little bit of money, but not enough, certainly, to buy a house. And it worked so well. They did it several times in Liverpool. They can't seem to adopt it here, and they're constantly talking about building new houses, new houses, new houses. What about the existing houses that are all boarded up, ready to move into, if they just took the boarding down and left people take occupation of these houses and do them up? It just, I just think the government isn't doing enough to curtail the rise of suicide and the rise of depression, because Limerick has a very high rate of suicide.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm aware of that because I used to be in Limerick a lot when I worked with Pieta. And I think as well, Mary, it's important that we bring a sense of hope as well to the people who listen. And I know, even speaking from my own experience, I was 14 when my father died by suicide. And at that stage, I knew what the word suicide meant. I'd read about it, I'd heard it on the TV, but I didn't actually know another human being who had ever died by suicide. And it was at that point, I think it was around 1980, 1981. So suicide still hadn't been decriminalised here in Ireland. It wasn't decriminalised until 1993. So there was a huge sense of shame around it, and for my mother, not even being sure whether my father was going to be buried in consecrated ground. But it's interesting how at that stage you internalise that shame. And, God help my mother, she her life was thrown upside down. When I think of it now, she would have been, I think, 49, so younger than I was. But when you're a kid, you just think your parents are so old anyway. My father was 50. Yeah. My father was 50 or 51. I remember my mother saying to us, don't let anybody know what happened. You couldn't say what happened because people think we're all a bit odd, or people wouldn't want to know us. So at 14, when your friends are so important to you, for me, I actually never shared that with any of my friends.
So you never had that ability, or your friends to come to you and console you and say it wasn't, it's not your fault, or I'm here for you, or it's not your mother's fault, or you need to speak to somebody, because your friends were led to believe that he died of natural causes.
Well, that's what we were told to tell them, but I think things have a habit of spilling into the community. And I must share a funny story with you, Mary. I remember it was this guy. I was about I think was 15 at this point. And oh, sure, I was only mad about him. And I wasn't one of the popular girls, unfortunately. But I remember we used to have this shampoo came on the market called Woodley Green Apple Shampoo. And I had real long hair at the time. And if you washed your hair with this, it smelled like apples. Your hair would smell like apples. So it was always washing my hair. Yeah. And a big group of us were gathering that evening, just as you might notice me now. And I was throwing the hair, And next of all, one of the guys in the group turned around and said, Cindy, didn't your outlet stick his head in the oven? I remember thinking, oh my God, I'll never forget how exposed I felt and how ashamed and how embarrassed I felt. And I couldn't answer, and he said it to me a second time, didn't he? And I said, no. And I got up and I ran off home, absolutely devastated. And I remember I think I would have said, Mary, how we come into contact. I had 3 children by the time I was 22, so I was married at 17 and I got married in April. That September, the baby arrived, obviously about 4 months premature. But seriously.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I used to say the 11th commandment, Mary, was thou shalt not be found out.
To what harm?
But yeah, and I remember going to the rotunda for my visit, and they take your medical history. So they asked me, were my parents alive? And I said, my mother is, my father's deceased. And they said, how did he die? And I was like a rabbit caught in headlights, because I said to myself, now, if I say it's a heart attack, they're probably going to think that there's these genetic problems because he was young. What am I going to say here? And in the end, I turned around and said, it was a road traffic accident, because that was the only thing that would make any sense. But at that point in time, I think I was about 18 then, I just couldn't say that he had taken his life, that he had died by suicide. And I think it was because I had internalized all of this sense of shame. And was I going to be judged?
Did he die
Sorry?
at home? Did he take his own life at home?
No, not in the house, in my grandmother's house. But there had been previous attempts at home that I would have witnessed as well. And often people would say to me, Cindy, is that how you ended up working in suicide prevention?
That's my next question.
Yeah. And to be honest, I don't think it's because, I didn't purposely go into counselling and psychotherapy to work with suicide. I probably went in because of my own experience of personal therapy. And my mother, in fairness, was really good. She had a family therapist come to the house to visit us, and she was probably, a bit of, even though she felt a sense of shame in some areas, she was still way ahead of her time. She was fantastic. Yeah. So I would have had an idea of what therapy was. And that was the journey that led me into counselling and psychotherapy. And it just happened by chance that I was introduced to Joan Freeman, and Joan had a private practice at the time, and I worked there with her. So Pieta was Joan's vision. It was Joan's baby.
I interviewed Joan last year.
Did you?
I must send you the interview. She's a sweetheart. I'm Facebook friends, and actually Teresa, her sister, Teresa Lowe, came to my the launch of my book in the Israeli ambassador's house in Dublin, and she was talking about Joan, and I asked Joan would she come on the show, but she was absolutely wonderful. She's done some fantastic work, Pieta.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. She really changed the landscape, I think, of how we view suicide here in this country. Yeah. That now there's a conversation about it. Now we're seeing an increase, well, over the years that I was there, huge increase in help-seeking behaviour. So I suppose the good thing, Mary, when you're talking about, how people don't have that secure base or the roof over their head. And, I was, I think, 27 with 3 children when I went back to college. So that's when I went back to do my degree, went on to do my master's. And now the kids would say, you're in school longer than we ever were, But I think sometimes with the right supports and for ourselves, and we can still accomplish our goals and our dreams, and we can thrive. I think, you know, we're so resourceful as human beings that we can actually come over, you know, overcome so many.
I was older when I went back because my parents died very suddenly after each other. My father dropped dead at 59, and my mum lost her voice that night. Within a few days, she was diagnosed with throat cancer, and she was dead a few months later. So I had a choice. I either sit at home because my job had folded up, they'd made us all redundant. Either that or go back to college, because the thoughts of sitting in a room looking at four walls and being constantly trapped in grief. I had to take that choice. I either allow myself to be engulfed by this grief, which is never more than millimeters away from my thoughts at any stage, you know, this grief. But I chose to go down there, and since you go on the education bandwagon, I call it, you can't get off. I just can't I can't step off it. It's just, I'm a real believer in lifelong learning.
Yeah.
And it keeps you mentally, it probably hides a lot of the grief as well. But at least you're not thinking about it while you're thinking about education.
Yeah, it can be a distraction, I suppose, really, can't it?
Yeah. It's a distraction, but it's a necessary, I think, distraction. And I think, would you agree that, you know, something like having a focus can actually might have helped somebody like your dad through these suicidal ideations that he had, that eventually ended up in
completing
his own life.
Yeah.
That is another thing. The phrase has changed, hasn't it? No longer does one say committed suicide, because it's no longer a crime like it was considered. It's now died by suicide or taking one's own life, or
And you know what? It's really refreshing, Mary, to hear you have the correct terminology, because even in the media today, you know, people lobbied really hard to have suicide decriminalised. And still in the media, you'd often see the words like, you know, somebody committed suicide, or. So it's lovely. It's really a breath of fresh air to hear somebody with the correct terminology, because, you know, as soon as we hear the word commit, it's either associated with crime or the church or sin, you know, and, you know, I think these poor souls are struggling. They really are struggling. I'm saying one of the reasons I think, you know, that we wanted to move on from Pieta and open up Athena was we really saw the value of earlier intervention, you know, supporting people when it's a pinch before it becomes a crunch, rather than waiting for people to get into crisis before they seek help. You know, so part of the work we do now, it's not just around suicide prevention or self-harm. You know, we work with lots of different issues: anxiety, depression. We provide relationship counselling, and it's lovely to be able to have that broad spectrum. And part of what we do is going into companies as well, to educate employees around how to mind their mental health and positive well-being. You know, so I think it's a language that we need to be very comfortable with, you know, and that we need to talk about self.
I know after Dad died, I first started getting panic attacks. Never knew what a panic attack was until the morning of his funeral. And just as the hearse arrived, I was on the stairs, and my mother's friends were trying to help me to breathe. And that was the very first panic attack. But with COVID and things like that, you know, I've got a few of them. And because you're not as active as you would be. I mean, normally I'd be keeping busy all the time, and I've never I've never relaxed since 1993. You know, I haven't relaxed. It's just been all a go, a go, go. And, you know, you sit back and COVID suddenly shakes you, for whether it's good or bad, shakes you into realizing that, God, I can't go anywhere. I can't do anything. I can't get out. I can't see my friends. And then you're internalizing everything. And things start coming, and then you have to try and find ways of keeping busy on your own. I'm lucky, I'm an only child of an only child. So I've always been able to keep busy and find ways of occupying and even talking to myself, because I think I'm the most intelligent person I can talk to. You know, so I think being an only child has equipped me for being in COVID, or finding ways. If I start feeling I'm thinking too much about the grief or the loss, I find something to do.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is that a good thing? Is it just shielding you, or is it necessary? Is it something you would advocate?
Well, Mary, sometimes when I work, I use a lot of CBT in how I work with people, you know, and during COVID, I think we all probably struggled, myself at times included, but I chose to put my energy into the things that was within my control, rather than putting my energy into things that I could not control, because other than that, I would have constantly felt deflated.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, and I liked the fact that I had some time to reflect. And I did have time to drop down and be still and be quiet and, you know, look at what it is that I need in order to be able to sustain me to continue in my work. And, you know, I was really privileged that I was able to work from home during COVID and, you know, learn something from it. Because if somebody had said to me 2 years ago, Cindy, you know, would you consider doing counselling over Zoom or over the phone? I would have said, absolutely not. You know, you need the face-to-face to build a relationship. And Mary, I was completely taken by surprise. You know, I'm still working with a number of clients that, you know, some in the UK, some in the States, that I've never seen. It's just been over the phone. And it's amazing that we were able to establish that therapeutic alliance. And, you know, I remember saying to one of the clients, because I knew she had had therapy before with somebody else, and I was saying, you know, how does this feel for you? You know, what do you think of this dynamic? And I was really surprised. She said, I think I'm more honest because I don't have to look at you, which was interesting.
Oh, that is, I understand that concept. I understand that concept. You can be yourself with a stranger over with this barrier, I suppose, between you, because you almost feel that you're never going to see that person again if you switch the laptop off, and you don't have to, you're not going to pass them on the street. That if they're living in the UK and here, and if you choose in the UK not to ever contact Cindy O'Connor again, Cindy O'Connor is never going to ever cross paths with you. So you can actually be, I mean, I worked as an entertainer in Bunratty Castle for 14 years. I loved every minute. I could be 100% myself there, because I saw different people every night of the week, and they were never going to see me again after, and they were never going to know the real me, and never going to get the opportunity of not liking me, because they'd only see you for one night, and they thought, you know, they see you as an entertainer, or they see you as whatever. But
then Mary, what did you do? Did you sing? Did you dance?
I was principal dancer there for 14 years. I danced all over the world. Wow. I sang as well, but it was mostly dancing. I was hired. But yeah, it was my life. 7 nights a week, 2 shows a night after a full day's work in an office. And then it all ended in 92. My dad just died, and Mum lost her voice that night, and my whole world changed. So I had nobody at all that I could really turn to. People, you know, you find out who your friends are, And I had some good friends, some really good friends. My mum's very good friend, her bridesmaid was really good, but to me, and you being an only child, you internalize a lot of things because you think, well, I've only had my mother and father. I told them everything.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're finding that you're not very good or at telling other people, because you never had to tell other people your problems. Because I never really had any problems anyway.
Yeah.
I don't, and
Here you are now, Mary, working in communication.
Well, I think I was always kind of with Bunratty and that, I think it equips you to, you're constantly speaking to people, constantly trying to promote, I suppose, the ethos of the castles and tourism to Ireland and that. So talking came easy to an only child. Shutting up wasn't so easy. But I found lockdown quite hard, and I'm sure there were other people like that who probably didn't have you talk about having your Zoom meetings with clients, and me having these interviews with people whom I would never have met had it not been for Zoom. I would never have met Cindy O'Connor had it not been for Zoom. So good things have come out of it, but I wouldn't replace the physical contact.
Yeah. Oh, I think it is lovely to have the face-to-face and to, just the energy sometimes that comes into a room when two people sit down, I think can be really powerful. But as I said, my own assumptions were quite challenged, when I thought that, there's definitely no way would counselling ever work over Zoom or over the telephone. So yeah, I learned something, and, learning something about me, how quick I was maybe to make those assumptions without really critically reflecting on them, so it was nice just to see my hypothesis having a different outcome to what I really expected. And it's lovely. And as I said, it's allowed me the opportunity to continue to work and to continue to reach out to people even further afield than normally, where I would work in Dublin too,
That's what I was going to say. Some people might find, I'm never going to. The idea, if somebody is completely and utterly depressed, the idea of going up, say, and having a shower, changing your clothes, walking out the door, actually walking out the door, getting into the car, whatever, and walking to a psychotherapist might be just a step too far for people. I remember after Mum and Dad died, 11 months it took me to go outside the door and to actually open the door and go out. That was how bad I was at that stage. And I can imagine that there are people who are like that, who will find that they can just rock up to the laptop or to the computer and talk to Cindy O'Connor, and they don't have to have their hair done, they don't have to have makeup on, or even they can be in their pajamas and you won't know they're even in them. And you can be the difference that way between them getting through another day and not.
Yeah, and I noticed even, Mary, with the clients that I'd probably be working with a long time. And when I went back to face, now they're saying to me, you know what, maybe we'll do a hybrid approach, Cindy, because sometimes it's really handy that I don't have to travel. That they perceive counselling now has been more accessible to them because they can access it via a different medium. So, I think definitely there's been some positives. And then for other people, they wouldn't dream of maybe having a Zoom session. They would always want to have that face-to-face. But I think definitely it's challenged my own assumptions around how we can reach out to people. And, Mary, just when you said there that you didn't leave the house for 11 months, like how difficult that must have been. And yet at the same time, we know that social interaction is a protective factor for our mental health, but sometimes people withdraw. rather than, put themselves out there. So I think it's nice that, like that, maybe if you had been offered Zoom or telephone counselling, maybe it would have been something that came into you.
People were offering, they were putting in little notes in the door, and Milford Hospice counsellors, my bosses in work, were very good to me. And they were putting suggesting counselling and that, but it wasn't for me, because I hadn't been used to talking out my emotions to anybody other. I had a very private family who, like your mother, don't talk about this, don't tell anybody this. If I hear you told anybody this, I'll kill you. And so I spent my whole life being, I suppose, told, don't say this, don't say that, I don't want to hear that back. Or if an adult came into the house, you were put out, so that you couldn't overhear adult conversations. So they were very private people. So I suppose I wasn't really able, and when I did, I kind of felt I was a burden on people. So I suppose, as an only child of an only child, you only have the people around you to talk to. And that was my parents, and I never had a problem. I can't remember a problem. I always say before them and after them, never had a problem before, and I can understand. I suppose that's I'm empathetic towards other people, because I know the challenges I suppose being an only child, and as I say, did help me through COVID. And the fact that I suppose I didn't go out for so long after they died also helped me, because I was able to entertain myself, if you like. And I think the longer you're locked up, or the longer you stay away from society, the harder it is for people to get back
in. And that's something that I'm seeing in the work at the moment, that people have almost feel that they've lost their rhythm for conversation or for interaction, and it's causing anxiety, for them to put themselves back out there in the world. But I think you said something really powerful, Mary, when you spoke about how your parents' value system was, you don't discuss the family business outside. And I think it's a very Irish thing. So for a lot of the time we internalize, particularly when you're growing up, we're like sponges. We internalize that belief system, which can make it very difficult then for people to be able to open up. And I think the beauty of being able to open up with somebody who's a professional and not emotionally involved is you can still have that empathy, you can still have that compassion, but you have somebody who has the ability to remain objective, so when you were saying that, I can just,
But recall. It's funny, Cindy, she was the type of woman that everyone came to with a problem. Everybody. We'll go to Auntie Myra, we'll go up to Myra, and she had people, she could, as she used to say herself, I know I'd go to my grave, she said, if somebody told me they murdered somebody. She had so many secrets belonging to others. And my dad was English, but incredibly quiet, and reserved, and she was outgoing and chatty, but there was a line: you don't talk about family business outside, and you don't repeat anything you hear in the house accidentally before you're thrown out if there was an adult inside there. So it was quite hard. So it doesn't equip you then for, and then when you do unburden yourself to people, you feel, oh God, I'm annoying them.
But Mary, behind that, there's obviously some rationale for why your parents would have been like that. And I think generally, even still today in Irish society, there was almost this idea that we have to keep the image of the family, very much to the forefront. Absolutely. So they could be killing one another behind the doors, but as long as the community didn't know, that was okay. And then people were very reluctant to seek help because they would have felt exposed, they would have felt judged, they would have felt that they wouldn't have been accepted as part of society. So very often, people were really frightened to be able to open up and say, actually, this is the reality of my world. And yes, there might be really difficult times in families, but there can also be very, very good times. But I think there was this fear that if anything seeped out, that you'd be seen as this horrific, dysfunctional family. And the reality of it is, every family is dysfunctional to varying degrees, but we're all human, and
I was lucky, I suppose, at the end that I had really a few, that saying, you don't need a lot of friends, you just need good friends. I have the same friends since I was 4, and all the way for many years, 20 years even, I have friends, but I wouldn't have a lot. I'd have those that I have I consider quality friends, and my mother's best friend and her cousin's wife were incredible to me, but it took me a long time to realize just how to actually talk to people outside of your parents.
And I often say in therapy, Mary, that the most important relationship that you'll ever have with anyone is the one that we have with ourselves, and how we speak to ourselves in our own head, and having that compassion for ourselves, while we also have empathy for others. But sometimes when I'm working, I use this thing called Jeffers' 9 boxes. So, if you imagine that you're writing down a game of X's and O's, and it gives you 9 boxes. So on the top line, you have family, you have friends, you have relationship, then you have giving back, you have spirituality, because for some people it's important, not for everybody. And then you have self-improvement. And on the bottom line, you have work, you have hobby, and you have health. So what that does is it helps us look at our emotional, our physical, and our aspirational needs. And I know certainly for me, particularly in the early days when we were setting up Pieta, there was only myself and Joan. We were the only 2 practitioners there. And we worked crazy hours.
How did you get involved? Did you get involved as a volunteer, or did you know Joan beforehand?
I knew Joan. Joan had a private practice, and I used to work with her in her private practice. But at that time, my full-time job was in Barnardo's, working with children and families. So I suppose Joan would have got to know, my passion for the work, and thankfully I'd like to think the quality of my work. So when she was setting up Pieta, I'll never forget, she borrowed on the strength of her house. I just couldn't believe that, her passion and her courage for this. And she came and asked me to be.
I found that amazing.
She said, Cindy, will you leave Barnardo's? And I said, my kids were quite young at the time, and I said, Joan, I think I love the work. And I said, but, I also have to work. And do you have any money to set this up? And when she told me she had borrowed using our house as collateral, I said, okay. And the following day I went in, wrote my letter of resignation and handed it into Barnardo's. So there was only myself and Joan, and we had two part-time receptionists. And when I think of it in those, our first day, actually, the premises wasn't ready, the furniture hadn't arrived. So my first day in work was in Joan's kitchen, and that's where we went planning and hoping that we could.
She would have made a wonderful president of Ireland when she went for the election.
Yes,
she would have been a very compassionate Uachtar on a Heron. We've been lucky with the female presidents that we've had in this country, and she would have been a wonderful addition to that. But I suppose it wasn't to be. But I don't think people really realize the extent of what she did to set that Pieta house up.
Yeah, and when I think back to those early days and trying to raise the profile, and if you said to somebody at the time, if they said, where'd you work, and you said Pieta House, they'd say, what? You know, I had one client and her kids used to call it Pizza House.
I was wondering, would anybody ever call it that?
Pizza House. But you think that by the time I left, there was 15 centres around Ireland, and it was just phenomenal to see the growth. But to be honest, Mary, you know, I think part of my decision then to leave at that point is, in some way, I probably allowed my identity get wrapped up in it. You know, and it was really important that me as a human being recognized, you know, there's more to me than Pieta. I'm more than that. And I could see again where, like, it was wonderful to be part of something that was, you know, just incredible, the growth and the amount of people that we were able to provide services for. But it really hit home to me, you know, we need to be getting in earlier. We need to be getting in sooner. We need to be there before people end up in crisis. You know, so I still have the ability to do my work and to educate the public in relation to, you know, positive mental well-being and how we can care for ourselves and how we can care for one another. You know, so it's lovely to be still able to do the work, just in a different context.
I interviewed a lady some months back, Hazel Larkin, and she's also from Dublin. And I suppose she was talking in the aftermath of that awful tragedy in Dublin, where the nurse killed her 3 children. And she was talking about how she contemplated killing her children and the sexual abuse she had experienced at the hands of her parents and her uncles and aunts. It was a familial thing, and other people from outside, and how her life had gone, and how she now works with the HSE as an advisor in some capacity, mental health advisor, but she's doing a PhD in an area of mental health and that. But it was just, you know, it just brought it all back at the idea that, you know, when we lock up people for a virus in their homes, and that we never ever know what's going on in that home, and we live in our little ivory towers thinking home is safe, home is where the heart is. That phrase, home is where the heart is. But you know, what if home is where the heart breaks?
Yeah.
Do you know, home is where your life is torn apart, where your world is torn apart, where you're disassociated from society, where you everything about you is stripped down to nothing.
And you know, again, Mary, I think just as we're talking about this, so I remember I was involved in setting up an outreach service in the inner city many years ago for Women's Aid. And when I looked at the research, and I haven't revisited it recently, so I can't speak very knowledgeably about it, but retrospectively, the research that I read at the time was women would stay on average 12 years before they would actually seek help. And I do think there's still an element of, if this is known by the community, if this is known by my colleagues, I'm seen as less than, or, you know, people have this perception that they're going to be judged or that they're going to be ridiculed. And rather than seeing themselves as a victim of a crime, you know, if that was a stranger who assaulted you on the street, you wouldn't think twice but you get the guards. But sometimes people try to just close ranks, protect the family and protect the reputation of the family. So, you know, what I really would love to see is for us to be able to live a more authentic life and realize that, you know, we may have different problems, but we all have some kind of challenges or blips in our life. And if we didn't have them yesterday or today, nothing surer we'll have them tomorrow. You know, but we can speak them, we can speak our truth, and we can learn to get the support and the help that's needed, rather than carrying shame that doesn't belong with you.
What do you think of the increase when you hear it all the time, you know, in the media and that, about mental health and people taking a step back because of mental health and I'm suffering from mental health? Do you think that it's a good thing that mental health has been spoken about so much in not so much the media, but with celebrities? Everyone seems to be talking. about mental health now, or do you think that you know, that people who really are suffering with mental health issues are getting their feelings out there? Do you know what I'm saying? Do you think it's positive that we're talking about it as a society more, or do you think that there are disadvantages by talking about it so much?
Well, I think there's two ways of looking at this, Mary. I think it's wonderful that we now have a society where we can speak about these issues, that it's no longer a taboo. As years ago, psychiatric hospitals, people were hidden away, they weren't part of the community. We didn't know what it was to see somebody or know somebody who suffered with particularly severe mental ill health. But I think when people, particularly where there's young people, they're very influential. So how we speak about mental health is really important. Like, all of the research will tell us that if there's a celebrity takes their life, and they give details as well of how that person took their life, there's an increase in suicide rates. So I think we have to be very careful about how we speak about this, and we don't want to create a contagion element, particularly with our young people that are an age that's impressionable. But I think sometimes mental health is spoken about, but it's not fully explained. So I could sit here and say that, I have anxiety, or I was crippled with anxiety, or I had X, Y, and Z. But also, I think very often it's, young people can not fully understand what this is, and not fully understand themselves even at that difficult time in their life. So I think we need better programs to educate correctly around mental health, so that people understand what it is, but also that people have a sense of hope in this, and that they know that support is available, and actually people recover. It's similar with self-harm. A lot of the time parents are terrified. Like, if we look at the rates of self-harm in this country, they're on average about 13,000 a year.
Yeah.
They're only people who present into hospital settings. The majority of people, we estimate that it's 6 times that amount, that people will never turn up to a hospital unless they needed stitches or whatever it may be. But we don't have 12 or 13,000 suicides in this country a year. So educating that sometimes this can be a coping strategy. Yes, it's a dangerous one, but it's a coping strategy, and teaching people how to regulate the emotions, how we can approach situations where we can respond rather than react. Because when we react, we're driven by emotion rather than being driven by logic and reason. So I think there's pros and there's cons to it. I think definitely we need to be able to have a conversation, but I think the context and the information that's given in that situation is crucial, not to have a contagion element.
I do too. I think it's a kind of a voyeur. I suppose in some respects it's a type of voyeurism when you hear certain media, when they talk about somebody dying by self-harm, or dying by their own hands, that they tend to go into the details of the death, and you can have copycat suicides with people who have been fans of the actor or the celebrity that has died. I just think it should be tackled in a more, I suppose, academic, a more knowledgeable way, by people like the Cindy O'Connors of the world being asked to talk about it and to discuss it more in the media than the way it is being done. I think the celebrity talking about the way somebody dies and going into the gory details often about it isn't helpful, I don't think.
Ideally, Mary, what I'd love to see, excuse me, is a program for children in 6th class, based on CBT, based on cognitive behavior therapy, recognizing that thoughts are not facts, looking for the evidence for the way they're thinking, because especially children making that transition from primary into secondary, it can be very difficult for them. And if they haven't managed to find their peer group, say by, their 2nd year in secondary, it can be so challenging. But get in with early intervention, educate them, give them the skills, that will help them navigate their way through difficulties in life, because we're all going to have them. You know, well, I don't know, I'll speak for myself, I don't know anyone who's had a charmed life from A to Z. You know, I think we'll all have some type of struggle in our life, but
Everyone.
it's getting in, you know, getting in at that early stage.
I think it's not how it's the old adage again, it's not how many times you fall down, it's how many times you get up. You know, and do you know, sometimes you can look at yourself and you can say, how many more times can I keep getting up? But I've interviewed quite a lot of people, as I've said to you before we started, who are victims of genocide and victims of the most horrific genocide. Most of them, I have to say, of my interviews have been Holocaust survivors and generational trauma. I've interviewed their survivors, but I've interviewed a woman who was on death. She was sentenced to death. She was pregnant on her second baby. Wow. She and her baby were imprisoned. Her husband was imprisoned. In the Vatican eventually got them out, and America got them out. There was all the countries got involved in it. But the one thing that every single one of them have said, bar none, of the survivors, Uyghur Muslims, I've interviewed them as well, and their treatment in China. The one thing that every one of them said without fault was hope was what got them through. Faith, not faith in a God or faith in a messianic figure, but faith that things can, look, I'm bad today, but tomorrow will be better. I'll wait till tomorrow. If you could kind of have that attitude, I'll hang on till tomorrow. Tomorrow might be better. And then when tomorrow comes, tomorrow might be better, and everything might be better, or I have the hope that I'm going to achieve this by next year, and to give yourself little landmarks, and even if you don't reach them, keep moving the goalpost.
Yeah.
And one little bit, and I found that profound, that every one of them said. In fact, Viktor Frankel, in his book Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Meaning, yeah.
That man should have been dead with what he suffered and what he saw, but hope was the driving force with every single one of them. That messianic faith beyond a God, beyond a religion, that it can only get better. And you can live without love, he said, and you can live without food, but you can't live without hope. And that's what I find COVID has done to a lot of people, is strip them of a sense of hope to an extent. And that's why at the start I said to you, perhaps you're probably inundated with people now. I'm surprised you're not.
Yeah. Now I'm busy, but not as busy as in relation to what we're hearing in the media. I wouldn't be as busy as what we're hearing with the level of suffering out there. But I am kept going, Mary, believe you me, I am still kept going. But I do think, you know, getting into schools, teaching our children how to build up their resilience, you know, having positive conversations around how we can self-care, how we can mind our mental health, you know. So I think it's really about getting the balance with those discussions, you know, not just been hearing the gory details, as you said earlier on, and then seeing the contagion element, you know, but giving hope and building that resilience. And, you know, I think it's amazing what people can overcome in their life. As you used Viktor Frankel there as a classic example, you know, and went on to.
Yeah, I don't know how that man, he for anyone who doesn't, who hasn't heard of Viktor Frankel's Man's Search for Meaning, it's a complete must to read. It's so easy to read, and there isn't even I don't think you can go a sentence without finding a quote that is of utter relevance to any part of your life. It is just the most
inspirational.
Most profound book I've ever read. You know, I love it. Man's Search for Meaning. But I love you to end. I love your logo. Athena is known as the goddess of wisdom. The owl was her trusted companion, and olive tree is synonymous with compassion and generosity, and is in keeping with the style and ethos of how all three of you deliver your service. It's a lovely name, the goddess of wisdom.
Well, you know the way she's the owl. We said we're no spring chickens anymore. We're more like owl ones.
The owl ones.
That's our joke between us. You know, we're not spring chickens anymore. But with that comes wisdom, Mary. And you know what? You're quite an inspiration yourself. You know, just to be able to talk about your grief. I loved actually the way you spoke about the grief of your pet. There's an organization I've just come across recently called Solace, and people can go to them if they've lost a pet, because what they find is that sometimes it's not treated as an actual grief process or a significant loss. So it's lovely that people are going to be able to access that service. But for you to speak about, there you were away for those 11 months, and look at you now. You know, you're reaching out, and it's just a privilege. You know, I'm up in Dublin, and just to be able to connect in with you, Mary. And I really enjoyed it.
To talk to you, just Cindy. I was just going to call you by your name that's up here, on the screen when it goes out. But it's a lovely name. Your real name, but Cindy Connor, and I hope we keep in touch.
I'd love to, Mary. I'd love to. And my job was so good the whole way through.
That's it.
She didn't bark once.
What's his name?
It's a girl. She's called Belle.
Belle.
Yeah.
My cousin's dog is called Belle as well. Yeah, mine are Heidi and Hugo.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, Heidi and Hugo. God.
Hugo, very designer.
That's right. My friend her daughter found him outside her door when he was about less than a month old, and they were overfeeding him with killing him with kindness, and they hadn't a clue. They'd never had a dog before, so I said, "Look, I'll take him." So I added him to my already zoo, and but now I just have the two of them. So yeah, it's but
you
it's
opened your heart and your home.
My heart and home.
Yeah. Your heart and home, John. Yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely, Mary. And I do hope that we get to speak again. It was lovely today. It was very enjoyable.
Keep in contact. I said you
without a doubt.
I have lots of questions for you. Cindy O'Connor, or Dr. Cindy O'Connor from Athena, the Academy for Mental Health and Wellbeing, and her colleagues there, her co-founders, I suppose, Marguerite Kiley.
They're great. They're amazing women.
I wish all three of you the very best of success. It's kind of double-edged sword. You're kind of wishing you success, but also wishing people mental health at the same time. So you're just kind of like saying they're both they're a symbiotic relationship between you and helping people to become well.
And Mary, you know, we would go to the dentist to have our 6 months checkup. We would go to have our bloods done. There's nothing wrong with linking in and having, you know, a little head check every now and again. So it doesn't necessarily mean we have to be in crisis. I think it can really expand the awareness of ourselves and build our resilience, you know, for future situations.
Well, you're very easy to talk to.
And likewise. That's my job, Mary.
Yeah. But Cinderra leis an Clare, that's the end of the show for today. Le cúnamh dé, bhfualam tú go léir Chiacana Sonas agus Gra. I wish you peace, happiness, and love. Agus Gadesha Slán. Slán, Cindy.
Slán.